Okay, so today I'm talking with Father Jeff Dorn, also Dr. Jeff Dorn, and you are a priest in the Anglican Church, um,
Correct.
and your doctorate was from Assemblies of God Theological Seminary. Is that right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Very good.
So, and that's probably a little bit of an unusual combination. So maybe you could just share a little bit of your background and how you came to uh, come by those different titles.
Sure. Happy to. So, growing up as a kid, in mostly living in Pennsylvania, my family went to a church that was United Church of Christ, liturgical church, still in existence today. And that's what I knew, and I got saved. I came to know Christ in the United Church of Christ Church. And when I went off to college, I did, I think, what a lot of college students do. They kind of experimented with the churches that were close by campus. I knew I wanted to continue going to church on a regular basis, but I didn't have a car. So I was at the mercy of those who would take me with them. So I went to some very large churches, very small churches. I went to one Baptist church one Sunday where they had a time of praise at the beginning, and I found out they were a very liberal, politically active church, and so a lot of the praise reports was, "I'm being investigated by the IRS because I've been refusing to pay my taxes for years, and isn't God good?" And so visited there a couple times with my roommate, and never really settled never really settled on one church. There was one denominational church that I probably did center on the most later in my during my college time. And then at the very end of my senior year, I met a young lady who would eventually, not too long after, become my wife. I met Jessie, and she and her family had basically always been part of the Assemblies of God Church. And so I would often visit her on the weekends and go to church with her and her family, and realized that at that time there was something in their worship and understanding of worship that I had missed, and that was the power of the Holy Spirit. And so, as a result, having not grown up um, in that denomination, but knowing that I wanted to do full time ministry, and most likely it would be with the Assemblies of God. Jesse and I, after we were married in June of '93, moved to Springfield, Missouri, to attend the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary, where we both ended up getting our Master's Divinity. I went on to get my doctorate in ministry there as well. And in 1997, I was ordained as a minister in the Assemblies of God. Yes, yeah, 1997. I was ordained as a minister in the Assemblies of God, and ministered with that church or that denomination in one context or another for about 25 years before becoming an Anglican. Um, the process of switching between the Assemblies of God and Anglicanism does seem like it sounds like a huge switch, but in some ways, Jesse and I found that it wasn't. Um, that came about in 2016. I was working at the time for Compassion New England, and
As was
I
I.
knew it. Yes, you were
Yeah.
as well. That's right. So I was working for Compassion New England, and I started to feel God pull me pulling me back into pastoral ministry. I had pastored a church while in seminary when we were living in Missouri, and I felt Him pulling me back in to pastoral ministry. but I wasn't sure what that would look like. Well, Compassion New England partnered with an Anglican church that was in Franklin, Massachusetts, and Father Dan was the rector there, and he and I would get together on a regular basis to chat about the things, how his church could help Compassion New England, and then we, became friends, and we continued to meet on a regular basis just to kind of talk. And it's often hard for pastors to find somebody who they can talk to openly and honestly about ministry who really understand it, and so we had that type of relationship. And I was telling them that God was calling me. I felt God was calling me back into church, full time pastoral ministry. And as we talked about my calling and my giftings and my education, he realized that there was a position that he wanted to create at his parish that would be perfect for me. And he's like, I would love to have you apply for this clergy position at our church, but the catch is you would have to become Anglican. And so I'm like, well, what is Anglican? I didn't know. And so he provided me with some resources. I began to read the history of the Anglican Church, method of worship. I'd been to his service a few times, doing the standard missionary window
Hmm.
there, talking about the work at Compassion New England and specifically the programs that they were partnering with. And so I knew about their service. I knew it was very liturgical, in some ways similar to the service that I had grown up with as a boy. I knew they served the Eucharist, or the Communion, Lord's Supper, every Sunday in service, and had really valued that. So then it became time to have a conversation with my wife Jessie about this potential shift. Now, again, she had only known all her life, and her grandparents before her, were very much dedicated and committed to the Assemblies of God. And so we prayed about it. We talked about it. She came to a service, and it came to the part of the service where it was time for the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, and she was so touched by how, in the Assemblies of God Church, in most of them anyway, the center, in most denominations, really Christian denominations, the center of the service is the sermon. And the sermon can be 45 minutes to an hour or longer, depending on the preacher. So in the Anglican Church, communion is the center of the service. So, like, I'll be preaching Easter Sunday, my sermon will probably be about 15-20 minutes max, because everything in the service points to the receiving of and participating in the Lord's Supper. And she really fell in love with that, and so the transition to Anglicanism was in full swing.
Hmm.
And so I had to first be ordained as a deacon in the Anglican Church, and that occurred in 2017, December of 2017. I was ordained as a deacon. And then I had to serve for at least 6 months at the church in Franklin as a deacon before I could be ordained as a priest. And so I was ordained as a priest in May of 2018. And in a lot of ways, there's not a lot of difference. I mean, methodology of service, or order of service on a Sunday morning, is very different than what we were used to with our Assemblies of God churches. But one of the great things about the Anglican Church is there is still a great emphasis on the work of the Holy Spirit. Um, we were so surprised when Bishop Bill, who was Bishop of the New England, the Diocese of New England, when he prayed over us at my installation as a priest, he prayed over us in tongues. And we've seen
Hmm.
moves of the Holy Spirit during our time in the Anglican Church. Um, you know, because that was a question I had to answer a lot with my Anglican friend or Assemblies of God friends and fellow
Hmm.
pastors. What about are you deserting the work of the Holy Spirit and the baptism of the Holy Spirit? And I was able to clearly say, not at all, not at all. Fully embracing that, and the Anglican tradition does that as well. So that's where I've been ministering as I've been as an Anglican since 2017.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Yeah, that's really interesting because you know I would say like the story you told is similar to like my parents' story, and probably a lot of people. I would say you probably even still happens, but it seems like people are growing up in some of these more formal liturgical types of churches. Like my dad grew up Roman Catholic, but it didn't really speak to him. It was just there. It was just part of the
Hmm.
background. And then he had a real conversion experience when he was in college, and so I grew up going to more low church, type of evangelical kind of churches, and and now you've kind of returned back to
Hmm.
which and the really cool thing is that I see it's very interesting because I see now a lot of people in my generation grew up in a lot of these evangelical churches or non-denominationals and things like that, and that um, became common to them, and then as they've maybe deconstructed or had questions about things, a lot of people have returned to faith, and a lot of people in my generation are returning to the more liturgical churches because
Hmm.
the sense of awe and wonder is there. The symbolism and the imagery and all that. I do think it's really interesting because and of course the other thing is that now we have the internet and you can learn about all these things, and so
Yes.
a lot of people are going to Catholic churches, and Eastern Orthodox churches are really kind of on the internet is becoming like very popular, but
Hmm.
Anglican is very interesting to me because you know like I understand the theological implications of the Reformation, and so it's like I couldn't be Catholic because I just disagree with a lot of their theology. But like an Anglican church is still a Protestant church, more
Hmm.
in a real sense in the ways that really matter, but it has a different emphasis than you might get at a big megachurch or something like that.
Hmm.
So I think that's really cool. It's a cool thing to discover. And I think it's interesting just that, it does, every church is going to have their statement of faith and say this is the right way to do it. But as individuals, we do end up kind of moving around a little bit, and you can't help but bring some of your
Hmm.
AG background into the Anglican Church, and those who
Sure.
are going the other way. I think some of that mixing of the waters is kind of a
Hmm.
good thing for the church
Yeah,
overall.
it's been interesting because a lot of especially a lot of the clergy that I've met here in New England, um, very few of them had been Anglican or Episcopalian, because for the longest time the Episcopalian Church really was the Church of England in America,
Hmm.
and now Anglican, the Anglican Church of North America, and there's some other Anglican groups that have churches and clergy here in North America and the United States. But a lot of the clergy I meet um, come from various backgrounds, Baptists, non-denominational, former Catholics, so, and that's one of the things we all say, the Anglican Church talks about being like the medium way, the middle way.
Mm.
And so it embraces, the Anglican Church embraces um, really much, or if not almost all of the tradition of the other Protestant churches, and is has learned how, or has put together this beautiful way of emphasizing each part. So regardless of what vein of Christianity you came to or what flow, when you come into the river of Anglicanism, you feel comfortable there. You feel like that your understanding of faith is understood there and valued there.
Hmm. And you said you explained it wasn't really too much of a difficult transition, but was there any kind of like theological changes or anything you made gave you any pause, or did you had to just consider in that transition?
Um, the big question really was that of infant baptism.
Hmm.
In the Anglican Communion, Anglican Church, we baptize infants, and in that baptism, we acknowledge their becoming a part of the church family. And then, obviously, later in life, as they grow older, um, we hope that they will make individual commitments, to Christ and faith. And there's a confirmation class later on as they, typically in their teenage years, where they become members of the church, can be officially, and they are asked to make a public confession of faith in Jesus Christ. But and actually, as a boy, that's how I was baptized as an infant in the United Church of Christ. That's how it was handled there too. But then I remember when I joined the Assemblies of God, um, they talked about having a dedication for an infant and believed that that was scriptural, and then you would be baptized as your profession of faith whenever that came about in your life.
Mhm.
And so I was actually baptized as an adult in the Assemblies of God Church in Missouri, to make that profession of faith for myself. But that wasn't a huge hurdle. That was just something, after years of tradition that had to Jesse and I both had to kind of pray about and wrap our minds around and
Yeah.
understand how it worked, and the impact that it, because in that moment, not unlike the dedication of an infant in other denominations. So the family commits to bringing up that child in the ways of God, and the church family, the local church family, commits to supporting that family, bringing up their child in the ways of the Lord. With the ultimate goal being, desire being that when that child becomes into an age of accountability, that they too will accept Christ as for their and Lord and Savior, and kind of take over the management of faith on their own.
Yeah, that's I. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think it's funny with those. It's funny to think about the fact that like at one point people were having like wars over this stuff,
Hmm.
um, because really, it's kind of you're only really worried about kind of the fringe cases, and some people might say, because if somebody's serving the Lord, they love the Lord, it doesn't really matter when they were baptized, because they love God, they have a relationship with God, but it's the people that we're not sure about, or that's what people are arguing about, and I think it's
Hmm.
in one camp somebody might say, well, I know so and so is not serving God, or they don't, but they were baptized, and so they're
Sure.
part
Yeah.
of that
And so
family.
that's somehow their ticket has been stamped.
But then
Um,
even within evangelical churches and AG churches and things like, I've heard people. Yeah, it depends a little bit on theological beliefs, but you saying the same. I've heard people say the same things about. Well, they said the a sinner's prayer at summer camp when they were a kid, and so I know that they're still part of God's family. So it's kind of the same
hmm.
thing.
Sure. No, I agree. Yeah, you're right.
uh, and one of the things you had mentioned, this is when we had talked in the summer, was that you're not often haven't been working full time 100% in ministry, but you're bivocational, which is something near and dear to my heart because my dad was also a bivocational minister for most of my life, and so, um, and I I'm kind of trying to start this program because, um, on the one hand, I think people who don't necessarily feel called to ministry as a full time vocation, sometimes we undervalue and underappreciate their necessity in the church.
Sure.
And on the other hand, those who do feel called to a full time ministry, and this was even, this is for my case, something I dealt with, you kind of tend to put a real evaluation of your personal value and worth
Yeah.
on
Yes.
how much you're doing for the church or how much measurable success you're having. And so, why don't you just kind of share a little bit about how you've been working and doing things outside of ministry as well?
Sure. And that's actually something that um, I've struggled with, and not too far into the past, actually. When I came into the Anglican Church, I was hired as um, I didn't have priest in the title at the church because I wasn't ordained at the moment. So I was director of what was it, outreach and family ministry, and which was great, and it was a full time position. So I was working solely at the church, which was wonderful, and got ordained as again as a deacon and then a priest, and um, thinking at some point, um, I'll have my own parish, and that became a focus, probably an unhealthy focus after a while, um, and um, and then unfortunately, so I started there in 2017. In 2019, I was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer.
Hmm.
So I was out of commission, wasn't working for the church, really doing anything for the church for, oh goodness, from the end of August of 2019 until I think I started back kind of part time at the church there in Franklin in February of 2020. It was right before the pandemic hit, and I ended up in March of 2020 was let go from the church. The funding was no longer there to maintain my position, and I was unemployed for about 7 or 8 months, which is something I had never experienced before, and really started to question, okay, God, what's going on with my calling? Um, the Anglican diocese in New England doesn't have a ton of opportunities for clergy as far as leading a church, being the rector or a vicar. So vicar is the title for um, small works, small churches in the Anglican communion, and rector is the title for basically senior pastor or
Hmm.
lead priest for larger churches. And struggled with the fact that it didn't look like I was going in the direction that I wanted to, of becoming a lead priest somewhere. And then in time, my wife and I started attending the church that we're still at now, which is Anglican Church of the Redeemer, which is in Norwood. It's about 40 minutes from where we live. Um, Relatively small parish, but really wonderful people, loving people, and started to attend there. And the lead priest or the vicar there offered me the opportunity to preach once a month and be the celebrant or the leader of the service another once every month, and so serve communion and lead the service. And I've been doing that there now for several years, but still had it in my head, this, I have to become a lead priest somewhere sometime.
Mm.
And it's only recently that God has really allowed me to become very content and very satisfied with my part-time role there. So my official title there is associate vicar. So I preach once a month, I lead service once a month, I oversee outreach, and I take care of the church webpage and kind of the technology things for the church. And yes, only recently has it kind of been I've been able to relax in that and find peace in that.
Mm.
And if the Lord chooses to give me a parish of my own someday to lead, wonderful. If He doesn't, wonderful too. But you asked about ministry outside of the church. So just about 2 months ago, um, I one of the things that I've that has been kind of an interesting thing for me as a tent making priest, having to work somewhere else, is a lot of those full time jobs that we need to support the family have been short lived. Sadly, my resume is just crazy with the number of things that I've done over the years, and to take roles to support my ministry. At least that's how I had looked at it.
Yeah.
So 2 months ago, uh, was out of work again, or about to become out of work, and I went to work, applied for a job at a local national grocery store chain, and got the job. Started, actually didn't. So my previous job was ending on a Friday. That following Monday, I started at this new job, and I had determined as I came on staff at this new job that I wasn't going to. I was going to be upfront about who I was. That the question is typically asked. A lot of the people that work there at the store are also working other jobs. So you're either asked, what do you do for work when you're not here? What's your other job? Or what did you do before you came here? And
Hmm.
so I've been very vocal about the fact that I'm an ordained priest, and obviously a Christian, and that's really where I let it sit. In my interview process, I made that known, and actually, this company was great to work with me on my schedule, so I don't work weekends typically at all. So I don't have to miss church. I'm free to do Saturday activities with the church, and but even within the first couple weeks, as word got out that Jeff is a priest, people started approaching me. It would typically start with, "Hey, I hear you're a priest." "Yes, I am. Can I ask you a question about this, that, or another thing?" One young man asked me questions about praying. He understood, um, from his background, liturgical prayers and written prayers. And he's like, "But what if I have a specific need?" He referred to it as a sniper prayer, something I want to pray directly to God about now. And I don't know if there's a pre-written, pre-produced prayer somewhere I'm supposed to pray about it. And so I was able to tell him how to pray, how you can go directly to God with your need and pray and within the will of God, and that He hears that and He answers that prayer. So this is pretty cool. Um, Then I have another young guy come up to me. He is Muslim, and we've had some great conversations about faith and the importance of family and how important organized religion and faith is to us as human beings. And we've had some great conversations. Another guy, an atheist, who is interested in learning a little bit about the Bible, and we've had some really good conversations. Had the opportunity to pray with a father whose daughter and son-in-law lost their baby, and was able to pray with him about so. Um, and like I said, really, I've just made known who I am and done my and do my job there. and these things come to me. The
Mm.
folks are approaching me, and it's been amazing. It's been wonderful. I come home and I'm working a night shift, so I don't get home till around midnight.
Mm.
So typically, Jesse, my wife is already asleep, and some of these nights I'm like waking her up. I can't go to bed till I tell you about this conversation I had, so it's been. I read an article just recently about the pros and cons of being a tent making pastor, and one
Yeah.
of the pros was that you are connected to your mission field all the time. It's easy when we're full time in the church. When I went to seminary in Missouri, when Jesse and I went to the Assemblies of God seminary, we worked for the denomination at the national office. I worked at the seminary. Jesse worked for one of their other colleges there in town. They had their own credit union, so we banked there. Um, they owned apartments, so you could live in apartments owned and managed by the denomination, which we didn't do. We found an apartment somewhere else, but you could get into this kind of, in that case, this Assemblies of God um,
Bubble.
community bubble. Yeah, and really, if they had opened a Walmart, the church did. We would have probably never had to go anywhere outside of the church to get, to live. But you forget about what's going on, so, since I've begun working again, it's about 2 months. I've interacted with, had discussions with, began friendships with people I'm never I'm likely to never meet in my church on a Sunday morning. Will they ever come to my church on a Sunday morning? I don't know. And that's not necessarily even my goal. I didn't take this secular job to fill our pews at church. I took this secular job so Jesse and I could keep a roof over our heads and have food on the table and, have financially what we need. And if I can be a light for the kingdom while I'm there, I certainly want to do that. And God's honoring that so far.
Mm. I think that's awesome. I can definitely appreciate that because, like when I think about, I grew up in Christian home. My dad was a pastor, but as I said, he was bivocational, and in his testimony, he gave his life to the Lord in a real estate office that was, a business owned by a Christian, but they were doing that to be a light in the community, and um, and a lot of people won't go to a church, but God will bring the priest to the
Hmm.
supermarket and meet the people there. Um, and even I remember like most of my dad's career, he was a teacher, and often about half and half between Christian schools and public schools. So, but there's a little while where he was in between teaching jobs, and he had to take a job selling used cars. And I'm pretty sure he led more people to the Lord than he actually sold cars.
Sold cars,
So,
sure.
so um, which it wasn't like there was a revival happening. It wasn't really
Sure,
selling cars wasn't really his his
exactly.
wheelhouse. But
Yeah.
God had him there for a more important purpose, really.
Hmm.
Um, but obviously you're you don't have to be a priest to be influential in that role.
True.
Simply letting people know that you're a Christian is, and it's interesting how I think maybe just a lot of people have misconceptions, or if everything we're learning about is from the news or the internet about like what are
Hmm.
Christians like, and then you meet somebody or somebody. Sometimes you have maybe somebody will find out later on. I often had that it's not something I would necessarily bring up in my work on a day-to-day basis. But
Sure.
if I'm spending a little bit extra time with somebody and it comes up and what do you do? And oh well, this is something that me and my family do on the weekends. And oh, you're a Christian. Okay, well, I like you, and I didn't think I liked Christians, but you're a nice guy, so
Yeah.
I guess I was wrong about what Christians are like. So I think just the ability to be who you're supposed to be, and then out in the
Hmm.
world is a lot more powerful than maybe people tend to think.
Yeah. Well, I had just a conversation um, these during these last 2 months where one of the guys who's been coming to me now with some questions, asking me about Christianity and faith, and has had a lot of questions about Jesus and his crucifixion specifically. Um, he overheard somebody saying, that I was a priest, and he looks at me, he goes, "You're a priest?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, I am." "Well, you're not like any priest I've ever met before, or what I thought a priest would be." And I said, "Well," I was like, "is that a good thing?" He's like, "Well, I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know." So that's funny. Okay, well, honest.
So, and interesting, this kind of also intersects with my project, but as you're saying, it's a lot of young men coming up to you, and I see that there's definitely a real need for mentorship for young men. Like
Mhm.
they're not getting it from school. If they're going to church, if they're not going to church, they're not getting it there. Obviously, um, what do you? I don't know. Just I don't know if you're seeing more of this within your church ministry or other things, but just are you noticing trends of like, is this an area where you're seeing we need to? There's a need. I think there is a need, but what have
Oh,
what have you
definitely.
noticed? Like
Um,
over the years, how have things changed?
I think more and more I'm seeing um, that young men have less and less of an understanding of what it means to be a man. Um, Society has done so much to undermine the role of men in families, day to day life. Certainly, the role I would say of fathers, and just what it means to be a man, and then obviously in the church, what it means to be a Christian man, what it means to be um, that spiritual leader of your family, your home, and what it means to be a man in society. That we don't have to walk around kind of with our tail between our legs and feel um, and be weak. We can be strong in who we are as men, and how to interact with. Um, so this, it's interesting when I sit in the lunchroom and here and places I've worked before, hearing the young women have their conversations about the guys they're dating or the way they're being treated, and even one person the other day made a statement: "I hate all men," and without even thinking, I said under my breath, I don't know if they heard me or not. It's because you're not connected with the right men. But I think there is this problem now. I almost use the word pandemic. Maybe it is. I don't know. Where men don't know how to be the right man,
Hmm.
and they need someone to come alongside and walk with them and understand how they can be, um, a good man, a good father, a godly man, a godly father, a godly boyfriend. Even a godly employee, a manly, godly employee who comes to work and works hard and wants to um, earn their keep, earn their pay, as opposed to just coast through day to day life, getting a paycheck, um, for in some ways just kind of goofing around. Um, and so I think it's very necessary, whether or not I think some would say, yes, I need this, I would want this and need this. Others would, oh no, I'm good, I'm good.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure they are good. Um,
Yeah. Part of my kind of idea is I think that we would hope that some of these kind of relationships would just kind of occur organically, but it really doesn't work that way a lot. And so my thought was that we need to create intentional ways to connect people, younger men with older men, and you know not it doesn't have to be super organized, or
mhm,
but just to kind of get that thing like, here is a guy that you can go to, or here, meet with this guy, whatever, go have lunch once a week or something, go do this thing. My kind of idea is, well, we can get some of this through like volunteer projects, or teaching guys, like construction trades and things like that. That's kind of
sure.
like the way that I'm
Hmm.
taking it. But the model, you could do it with anything,
Sure.
um, and I, I think, because I think that there is that thing, people say like, I'm good, but people really do want that connection. It's just,
Hmm.
and we don't know how to get the ball rolling with those
Yeah,
things.
it's not, I think when, even, well, even, you see it in biblical times when, when the family stayed together, um, you know, the grandfather was there.
Hmm.
He could invest in the lives of his kids. I mean, one of the greatest things, as I look back on, as a kid, my life as a kid, was every summer I got to go spend a week with my grandfather, my grandma and grandpa, grandpop and Grammy. And I would spend a week hanging out basically with my grandfather. We would go fishing together. He had a huge garden. I would help him in the garden. He had, um, basically a shop, not unlike what if you have on the wall there behind you. He did a lot of work with his hands, and I would spend that week just soaking all of that up, learning how to fish, learning how to garden, learning how to, do things with my hands. And I loved it. Every summer, that was my week with him. My
Mm,
younger brother, who's 5 years younger than me, was not in the equation. It was for me. I was the oldest grandson, and it was a huge thing. Um, and I understood then it was a big deal that I got to do it.
mhm,
But obviously now as an adult, I really, really understand how important that was to me in my development. And fishing to this day is still something. It's my greatest pastime. It's the thing I love to do the most, to get away and relax and be out in nature. Um,
mm. Okay, well, I'll give you a spin on kind of a question I've been asking, like, to people, if you were like a carpenter or whatever, like, how, have you ever thought about Jesus as being a carpenter? Like, have you ever contemplated that or whatever? But in being a fisherman, how do you have you ever considered the fact that the first disciples that Jesus chose were
mhm,
fishermen, and what
sure.
how what do you glean from that, as
Well,
you have a passion for fishing?
so I mean, literally, so back a few seasons ago in my life, I was a part of a mentoring program for children of inmates. And I started as a volunteer, and then I went on staff, and I was the director of that program for a while, until the federal funds, for that program were taken away, reallocated to other federal programs. Um, but several of the young guys that I worked with, we would go fishing together. And one in particular, the first young man I had, he was 15 years old, but had to be the man of the house. He had a younger sister. He lived with his younger sister and his mom. He was the man. And the first time I ever saw him act like a young boy was fishing. He caught a fish for the first time, at least with me. And it wasn't big, it was small, sunfish, bluegill, whatever you want to call it. He had no idea how to get it off the hook. He's trying to grab for it. It's wiggling and hanging on the line, and he gets this huge smile on his face, and he's giggling and laughing. And in my head, I'm like, there's the young boy. And in that moment, he was able to relax. He didn't have to protect, because I noticed when we would go places together, and he was a big kid. He was bigger than I was, big, strong. And wherever I would take him, he was always in protection mode.
Mm.
He was going to protect. He had to protect his mom. He had to protect his sister. And when we went out together, he had to protect me. But that was one moment where he was able to let down his guard and be the young kid, young teenager that he was. Um, and I think that's what these mentoring relationships can do, whether it's at the lake fishing or in the carpenter shop or working on a car or computer, whatever. Um, it gives you the ability to see that person for who they really are. It builds a trust where they can let down their guard and be vulnerable, be you know, and allow you to see into them. And that's when you make a connection where you've earned the right, then really, to share with them your faith, I
Mm.
think. Um, and yeah, and that was fishing was the thing with especially with that young man. Um, and we did that, and he liked going to um, the Golden Corral buffets, uh, and he could pack it away.
Yeah. Well, yeah, food is definitely the um, universal kind of entryway to uh,
Hmm.
build trust and relationships. But I would say even there's a really big impact is when you can have that big meal after a day of hard work. It's
Hmm.
all the more
Yeah.
enjoyable, and that's something, like because I think about my dad. He did all sort of handyman jobs in the summer break when he wasn't teaching, and I would always kind of be like, this is boring, like, why do I have to do this? But then he'd push us further than probably further than I thought I could go before. But then we'd take that break and he'd take us somewhere and get lunch, and it was just like, you know I remember, I specifically remember the enjoyment of those meals versus a
Sure.
lot more than you know whatever typical summer vacation, you know uh, just hanging out or whatever. So I think there's just, there's something good to that.
Hmm.
um, did you did you have any other mentor relationships that really helped you? um,
Sure. And some were really um, later in life. Um, so when I went through my doctoral program, obviously at that point I'm married, young adult, married. Um, we were all asked to find um, someone to be kind of an accountability partner to us, or a mentor. Really, we were supposed to find somebody who had more experience in ministry, that we could meet with and talk to on a regular basis. And there was a gentleman, actually, his wife worked for me. Um, I worked in the business office and oversaw um, the management of the bookstore. And so his wife, he was a student. His wife worked in the bookstore, and they were from Mississippi. And he's an old gentleman, older than I am. He's still in ministry at a church in Mississippi to this day. Had a lot more ministerial experience, and so we would meet. Um, I'm trying to remember. I don't remember how often we would get together, and kind of talk about what was happening in my program and what was at the time. Um, I was in ministry at the church there in Missouri as well, small church. And so we would talk through what was going on at the church, what was going on in what I was learning in my studies, and how those things could be integrated into the ministry I was doing at the time. And that was hugely helpful. And then now, as a priest, one of the things that is recommended to us is having what the church calls a spiritual director. So I have there's another priest up here in New England, um, a gentleman who's been in the ministry longer than I have. He's retired now. He doesn't have a full-time presence at any parish, but we do a Zoom call, or call like this once a month, where he asks me questions about, like, what is God saying to you these days, you know how what ministry opportunities do you have at work, how's it going at the church. We have those kind of conversations every month. What's your personal relationship with God like right now? And it's been, when I first found out about it, and it wasn't required, but highly suggested that, we all participate in it. My initial response was, great, another thing to do.
Mm.
But um, but it really is proven to be a very important part of my walk in life. And you know the plus to it, the way it seems to be working with myself and he at this point, is he's somebody from the outside looking in, and very insightful. And so if a compliment is due me, and he gives it, it means a lot. And if a correction is due to me and he gives it, it means a lot.
Mm.
Um, or just, have you ever thought about coming at it this way? And he certainly has noticed the transition that I mentioned to you about being content where I am as an associate, and not feeling this unhealthy need to be a lead priest somewhere. And he's
Mhm.
noticed how that has changed my demeanor and even just the peace in my life. And so it's been a huge mentoring relationship to me, that I pray will continue.
Awesome. Awesome. Hopefully that's, I think, you know, that's for Christians who are, somewhat mature, that can be tough to have to go find somebody, but recognizing that, you know, I feel like I definitely been in a position where I've needed to be the mentor or whatever, but it's really important to recognize that we also are people who need to find
Hmm.
somebody. And
Hmm.
and like I said, it's kind of the same thing. You'd hope that those sort of things would kind of happen organically, but a lot of times they don't. And so we need to figure out ways to make it happen because it's
Yeah,
definitely
exactly. Hmm.
needed, necessary.
Hmm.
Awesome. Well, I think that's probably, I don't know. Rather than going off on another crazy tangent or something, we can kind of
Sure.
keep it focused there. But so people can see some of your sermons on the church website, which,
Yes, the website is acrnorwood.org. and we post them typically the same in the Sunday afternoon after the service is over. So I'm very excited. I have the privilege of preaching this Sunday for Easter Sunday. So
Awesome.
that sermon will get posted sometime in the afternoon, most likely, or the next day on Monday. And we also have, so there's three of us that are on staff, or three priests that are in this church. Father Allen is our lead priest, Father Jack, and both of those men have been great mentors to me um, since I've come to New England and joined the Anglican Church. And so their sermons are out there from the last, we started posting monthly or weekly sermons, I guess, during Advent, so leading up to Christmas. And so those are out there. Folks will be welcome to look at those and get in contact if you have any questions or spiritual needs. We'd be happy to address those with you.
Mm. And if anybody's, has spiritual questions and they're at the supermarket, you never know who might be a priest in disguise.
Well, I've had some conversation. But I've had some conversations with customers too who've overheard another employee talk to me and mention that and that I had one. So you're a priest, and I'm checking out their groceries and bagging them, and they're asking me theological questions about the church. Um, so that's been really interesting too. So that's another side to that, um, to my fishers of men, I guess, at the grocery store.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. And did you have a blog too? I think or somewhere. Or?
I have a webpage and a blog, One Epic Story, it's called. It's been dormant for quite some time. I need to get back to it, and it's on the agenda, and so I hope to do that soon. I'm also on Facebook. There's a Jeff Dorn One Epic Story Facebook page, and yeah, those are ways folks can connect
Cool.
and see what we're up to.
I'll put links to all that stuff so people can find it and check it out. And
Then I'll be compelled to actually get some more material out
well,
there.
and
It's
you
been
can
a
share
while
this.
since I've
So
posted.
this will be a free post. You were on
Sure, thank you.
a minuscule startup podcast. So
Great. Who knows where it'll go?
yeah. Awesome. Well, it was very great to talk to you. So thank you so much for coming on. And
It's my pleasure.
and this should be out on a Monday. So by the time people are watching it, they can go and watch your Easter sermon and check that out. So
Very
thank you
good.
very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for the honor of being here. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. God bless. Have a great
Bless you.
day.